We appreciate that you taking time off your busy schedules and to join our second scientific writing workshop. We do hope for productive and fruitful sessions, as today's workshop will deal more about technical aspects of scientific writing. And firstly, I would like to greet the head of the Department of Plant Pests and Diseases, Dr. Lukman Kurata Aini, as well as to all professors, doctors, colleagues, as well as to all students. And again, allow me to introduce Professor Eduardo de la Pena. He is a lecturer in Ghent University, Belgium, and also a tenured scientist in Spanish National Research Council. And for the record, he has published of more than 60 scientific articles and has an astonishing score of its index of 18. And without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Eduardo to start your presentation and discussion.
Good morning again to everybody. Thank you, Ito, for the introduction. And well, as you remember from yesterday, we had a difficult discussion at the beginning yesterday, where I was trying to get some information from you. I know I asked a lot of questions, but I think it was important to know the state of matters. No, so. Two messages that came across very clearly from the discussion yesterday is, on one hand, that yeah, you have a lot of pressure to publish because yeah, for several reasons related to promotion and that it was for you very difficult, a very difficult process, and there were a number of burdens or barriers, internal and external, that you had to deal with. So based in this discussion and the input that I got from you, I decided to keep it very simple. I'm not going to talk so much about philosophy of writing and technical aspects. I'm not going to talk about, or we can talk later on if you want, about scientific writing related to project proposals. I decided to keep it very short and try to come up with a step-by-step guide on how to prepare an article and which matters you should consider when doing that. So so my proposal is to review this step-by-step guide, and hopefully later on, when you have to write an article yourself or write a report, you can go back to this presentation. So I will send the presentation to Rina so she can share it with all of you, eventually with some supplementary material that you can check, so you can, at least you have a reference guide on how to prepare a paper. Of course, writing a paper, as I mentioned yesterday, is not, I mean, I can give you some tips. It's not a miraculous formula, but still, I think it's important that you take from the beginning some points into account. So let me share the screen with you. Just a second. So yeah, I had the impression from yesterday that this is the general feeling that you have when facing scientific writing, and actually I just want to to share with you that scientific writing is indeed very difficult. It's not only difficult for you, I think it's difficult for everybody. It's a process that requires time, practice, And of course, we all non-native speakers, we also have a language barrier that we have to overcome. Something that is also important, and I was commenting yesterday that it's important to to have a clear idea of how you want to frame your research. And I use this quote, perhaps it's a bit of a hard quote, but it also conveys certain truth that often in science is not only about having the idea, it's about how you present it, how you sell it, and by doing that, you can convince the world about something. So there is, in scientific writing, a part of a communication strategy to convince your reviewer or the community that what you have done is interesting. So that's something that that's also needs to be considered. Yesterday, after my introduction and about the discussion, we had, or I share with you what is research, what is scientific research, and one important aspect of scientific research is the application of the scientific method. So we define what is the scientific method, and we presented this flow, this change of events that you have to do when conducting research. And I asked you to keep this in mind, and I do it again this morning, because this is something that actually this path that you see on a screen is what we are going to do pretty much. We are going to use when writing a paper. So we identified a problem. In the introduction, we have information around it. We will at the end formulate a number of questions and hypotheses. And we, of course, we conduct research, gather data, analyze it, and based on the analysis, we draw certain conclusions. And we do this in an iterative way in science to advance science. But I think what you are here for is not to hear me discuss about the philosophy of science, about the scientific method, about perhaps you have heard this before. What you want to have here is a really pragmatic approach to writing a paper. And I want to do that now in the morning in the, what do I have, 1 hour and a half? So you tell me, Rina, how much? I just want to go slowly on how to write a paper, and I've used this scheme because it really conveys from the beginning how a scientific paper should be and the structure. And you can see that you have the usual structure with an introduction, material and methods, result, discussion, and then conclusions and implication. And you can see that there is a drawing with a certain scheme. This is related, it's a graphical representation of the extension of the sections that you include in a paper. And you see that it has a funnel shape, so it starts white and then it narrows down and then it widens up again. So a paper should be like that. So you should start with a wide concept introduction, so going beyond the very specific detail that you have done. So starting wide, then narrowing it down to what you have done. Is this me, the sound, or? So it's just. I don't know if it's me or. So you have this funnel shape, you start quite wide, so presenting or framing your research in something that is of interest of a wider audience. Then you go down to define what is not known and what your particular research is going to be about. Then the material and methods and results are very brief, so they have to be detailed, but brief and brief. So really to the point. And then you open again in your discussion the scope. So this is a general flow that and a general representation of how a paper should be. But let's discuss this step by step. Okay. So scientific writing, so clear scientific writing generally follows a specific format. So you have this section, an introduction to a particular topic, the hypotheses that are going to be tested, a description of the methods, the key results, and finally a discussion that ties, takes all results together and put them into a broader perspective. And this format, actually, no matter from which discipline you come from, whether it's biological science or with other related science, agricultural sciences, or in social sciences, you see this structure quite spread. So most of the scientific papers include this this build up, this structure. And something that I want you to have in mind, and I think it's a very important, especially for students, I think, is that we tend to think that writing is a final step, and you do this at the end. So you lift everything, the writing of everything at the very last moment. And then it's also a source of important problems. So you have the stress of needing to finish things. You have to rush to write. And this is the beginning of a recipe for unsuccess. If you want to be successful in scientific writing, as in many other things, you have to start from the beginning and start way ahead of time. And I sorry that I use these memes, but I think it's a way of, I don't want to torture you with only text slides, but it really conveys the message. You really need to think about writing the paper from the beginning of the research process. So don't leave it, don't procrastinate, don't leave it till the end as something that, but do it from the beginning. And actually, it's also very, it's a good practice when you start to do research to think from the beginning, or to have an outline of what type of paper, what type of idea do you want to bring across. And you know, the first part of it is gathering information. So successful writing starts with gathering references, looking at what is the relevant literature, reading it. It's not only collecting and putting in folders your papers, but read it. And if you read the papers you are working on, or you read the abstract and the introduction, you will get a feeling of what is important, how other authors frame their research. So it's very important, not only writing, but reading. And graduate students, you should read papers. This is also at a later stage, when you are a faculty, perhaps you have been exposed already to many papers, but still read a lot. To write well, you have to read a lot. There is no other way around. And imitation is perfectly fine. I mean, an imitation. I don't mean plagiarism, but if you read, you get the idea of how other people present their work related to your topic, then it will be much easier for you to start preparing a manuscript. Something that is also very important is what's the audience that you are targeting. Of course, here you told me yesterday, I want to publish in high-ranking journals. Okay, that's still very general. Do you want to target specialists, or do you want to target a broader public? So you really have to think to whom you want to get your message across. So before writing the paper, you have to, and here I come to the steps. You have to investigate, to do research of how your work fits into the existing literature. So it's very important to think from the beginning how you research, what you have done or what you are doing compares to other studies. And by doing this, you will see how your work fits into others people's work. So this is very important. So how do you do it? This is easy for me to say you have to do research. What you have to do is to ask yourself these questions. What do we know about the topic I'm working about? What are the open questions? What is still left to be known or answered? So that what do we still not know? So this is something that from the beginning you have to know. You have to know what you know and what you don't know. And you have to also reflect and think and find out why is this information important? So perhaps you have received a topic from a supervisor. Yeah, you have to reflect on why this topic is important. Of course, probably your supervisor has proposed you this topic because he has a project, so there is some funding. Probably there is a problem, a need, an application that needs. So you have to know why what you are doing is important. Not only know what you are doing, you probably all know on what the species you are working, and but why is knowing about this important, relevant? So this is the first step that before even writing the paper, you have to think about or consider. So ask these questions highlighted in red. Again, I said, you have to define what is your audience. This comes later on also when selecting a journal. Are you going to send or try to present your work in a ecology journal, or are you going for a discipline journal on phytopathology or entomology or bacteriology, whatever? Or are you going to send it to a journal on applied aspects about biological control? So you have to know from the beginning what is your target audience, because the type of vocabulary that you have to use, the messages vary depending of the audience. If I write a paper about, I just give you a general example. If I make a study about the interaction between an aphid and a plant, it's completely different if I send the results of this research, looking at, I don't know, population buildup of an aphid on a crop. It will be completely different if I send it to an entomology journal, where I have to highlight aspects related to the insect, or I send it to an ecology journal where probably, interactions or mechanisms or other aspects need to be presented. So perhaps are exactly the same data. So I have a set of data, but depending of what is my target audience, I have to think about different things. So this is also important. from the beginning, that you know to whom do you want to give your message. And I have here a list. So again, I think the best that you can do is ask yourself a number of questions. Who is my audience? What are their goals in reading my writing? So you have to think what the community that you are targeting is going to learn, or what is going to get out of your article. And the most important thing when writing a paper, and it may seem trivial, but it's very important, is what is the message that you want to bring? A paper is a message. It's not just this complicated structure of introduction, material and methods, results. You have to think in 2 sentences, what's the message that you want to convey. If it's not clear for you what's your message, it will be very difficult to write a paper. Then you start to write and to put things together, but you have to, it's like a story. It's like when you really, perhaps you think it's not true, but I really think it is. It's like when you tell a story to a child, or you tell a story, a short story, you bring a message with that story. So what message, what is the take-home message that has to be from the very beginning very clear. So if these points are clear, or if you know what your message is, the trick, or what is important is that you explain to the audience that you are targeting what you want them to learn from this story. So that's so it's not about explaining what you did, but what you learned and why this is important for other people. So you want to share what you have learned with other people, with other scientists, and explain them why this is relevant for their study. So this is, I'm not talking here, we are in the preliminary steps before writing the paper, but these are the things that you have to consider. And then when you have these preliminary steps have been taken, you will you will face writing or preparing a draft following this structure. So I explained already that you have to start wide and then narrow down and go wide again. So let's take some steps to see how we start. So how we tackle your first draft when you have to draft a paper. So of course, you can start, or you may already draft to have an idea of what's the title. You can write a tentative title. Usually the title is also decided at the end, but it's not bad to already from the beginning and to break the writer's block. When you open the computer and you have a white screen, you don't know, and you have a pressure, what do I have to write? Just write, just start. The best thing of writing is start writing. Probably at the beginning, yeah, it will be difficult. It won't, you won't find the words. You will doubt about many things, but you just write what, and when you have something, you can refine it, you can work on it. So a way to start is just a tentative title. And usually if you have a paper, you have a title, an abstract, and the keywords. So even though the title can be tentative, try to think of a catchy title. What do I mean with catchy? You may think it's easy for you, Eduardo, to say, give a catchy title. Catchy You know what I mean with catchy, something that is attractive, that is interesting for the audience, like slogans of politicians or in the television. You have this reclam, how you call it, publicity. They have always short, catchy messages. So try that the title is catchy, it's interesting. You want people to read your paper. You want the editor who gets your paper to think it's interesting. So try to be. So what can you do to do this? Usually it's better or more attractive to have a conceptual title, something that conveys an idea. If your title is very specific of a certain species, of a certain genus, yeah, it will be only interesting for those people working on that particular genus. And if you are working in a rare, obscure plant or insect, that won't be interesting. So so try to be, again, in your title, catchy and present something that is conceptual. The abstract, again, is usually written at the end. So once you have the whole draft, you usually prepare the draft, the abstract. But you may want already outline a bit the abstract. You may, so you know that you can define a number of ideas in the abstract. So you know, so you think already about what you are going to write. But once again, this section, you can leave it at the end. So even though a paper has this title, abstract, keywords, introduction, and follows this linear section, it doesn't mean that you have to follow this while writing. Actually, you may start, and I start usually my papers writing the material and methods, not writing. So this is something that that you have to take into account. So the introduction, we can leave the title and the abstract and the keywords. You can start, you can write tentative things, but at the end you will refine this when you have everything. You start with the introduction. So the introduction sets the tone of the paper. So you provide here all the relevant background. And here in the introduction, you have to clearly identify the problem you want to address. So think of a funnel. Start wide, so you have to frame your research in something wider than your own research, something that interests to a broad public. And then you narrow the introduction till you present the specific question that you are trying to answer. So in the introduction, it's very important that you state the wider implications of your work. What are the societal impacts? So I mentioned yesterday that I think many of you are working on crop protection or related disciplines. Perhaps you are working in a certain type of crop, or you are working with certain species. I think it's my suggestion is that you think why knowing about this is important, and in this case, it usually is related to food security, to reducing yield losses, to so this is these are problems that everybody can understand, and then you will go down to what is your topic. If you start by talking about yeah, certain species that, yeah, nobody between brackets is interested in certain species from, but everybody in different regions is concerned about yield losses, understanding questions related to yield loss or agricultural management or conservation. So it starts wide and then go to your topic, okay? And so you start general and with framing your research into a wider topic, and then you have to present the background information related to your topic. Here you have to, yeah, keep a balance. You have to give background information, what is relevant, but it's not the idea that you present a detailed review of everything that has been done. You have to select what from what is being previously done, what is relevant for you. So you don't need to present the whole history of your field of interest, but what is relevant. And use, I mentioned it in one of the points, use in general in text citations. So what do I mean with that? So text, suppose you have a study by Smith et al. 2008. So when you write the introduction, and you will give references, it's better to use in text citation. So that means you start with a sentence, yield losses in, I don't know, Indonesia are maybe caused by I don't know, by this organism. And this is something that Smith et al. Reported in 2008. So this way of citing is better than say Smith reported. So you use in text, okay? So once you I don't know if there are questions so far. I mean, it's also, there is a lot of text I'm talking here. If there is something that isn't clear or you want to ask, you better ask me. So I don't know if there are questions or no.
Question from students? Yeah.
Okay. So recap, you start framing your work, general, then you give background information about your topic that is relevant to your topic, that is related with what you did. And by doing that, you start narrowing the introduction until you arrive at what we define or what is known as the knowledge gap. So this is the gap that you are going to fill, what is not known, what you have done with your research that you are going to fill. So you will have to give in the introduction what is the specific focus of your research and what you do to fill this gap. So it's also very important to clearly state what's the problem that you are addressing. So there is something that is not known, something, or there is, or your knowledge gap could be defying or refuting a certain idea. So you have to explain it. So you will start stating what is the situation, what's the background about that, and say, well, in general, it is thought that the causing agent of, I don't know, potato decline are fungi, but we don't know what is the role of root feeding nematodes in the situation. So that's not known. That's your knowledge gap. So you are going to address. So the knowledge gap is actually can be something very tiny, and I mean not the organism itself or what you are doing, but could be a small piece of research into in a big scientific field. So that's okay. We all do small contributions to a discipline. So you don't have to think, nobody here, I don't know, I mean, none of us probably is Einstein or one of these big scientific, but we can do very valuable science. You don't need to be, my point is, you don't need to be a genius and have a genial idea to do science. You just need to contribute. You can contribute to science with very small pieces of knowledge. But you have to explain how this little drop of knowledge contributes to the body of the discipline. And this is a crucial section of your manuscript. So you really have to define what is the knowledge gap and how you contribute to that. And this is very important to define this in your paper, because actually your discussion will be related to this. You come back in your discussion. So your whole discussion is explaining how have you contributed to filling this knowledge gap. Okay? So once you have defined your knowledge gap, defining this knowledge gap will drive your hypothesis and questions. Something that I want to tell you is not always you have to present an hypothesis in a research paper. You may have simple questions. In some cases, when you are working on theory, or you may need to include hypotheses. But in any case, when you define your concept gap, and this is clear, resulting from this, you will have you will be able to define what are your research questions and eventually your hypothesis. So may I have a piece of paper, like a tissue? So this knowledge gap and defining this and defining the questions afterward will have defined as well what type of experiments, thank you, what type of experiments sorry. So the hypothesis and your questions must come logically from what you have presented. So just one more slide. So what is a hypothesis? You may be asking. I guess you. So a hypothesis is a test table, something that you can test, explanation of something, of a phenomenon that occurs in nature, So why something that has been observed, of that you observe, is occurring? That's your hypothesis. So you present this also at the introduction. So hypotheses often relate directly to research questions. And usually hypotheses are written in the present tense. So let me share one paper with you, just to give you an example. Okay, so just a second. Okay, I think it's fine. Okay, so you see on screen, I decided not to make myself, because I think it's relevant, but I thought, okay, if we have to check papers or criticize paper, it's better to use my own, so I don't. So this is a paper I published. This was the first paper I published for my PhD. It's an old paper. It's from 2006, but it's published, or was published, in a good, in a quite Q1 scientific journal in New Phytologist. This is a scientific journal on plant sciences, but it's mainly focused on mechanisms. So it's interested in mechanistic research, trying to understand the interaction of plants with different groups. So I was working with Ammophila arenaria. This is a species that grows in coastal dunes at the coast. So it's a species that is not so interesting. It's not a crop. It's not. So if you go to the introduction, and I studied the role of mycorrhizal fungi and nematodes in the ecology of this grass. So coastal dunes are something that are interesting, but it's not of so much importance. Ammophila arenaria is a European species. So I decided to start the introduction with a very broad statement. So if you read the introduction of this paper, it starts a bit broader. I'm not talking about coastal dunes. I'm talking about soil organisms, because mycorrhizal. So I will start broader, and later on in the introduction, I narrowed down to coastal dunes, to my, so you start broader and then you go. So this is something that really has to be written in your head. Eh? And then in the final paragraph, you will have this. You usually present what is the gap, the knowledge gap, and what you are going to do to fill this gap. So if you read the final paragraph here, I define what is the knowledge gap, and I explain very briefly what I'm going to do, what type of experiments I'm going to do to fill this gap. So I did 2 experiments to test what is the role of nematodes and the interaction with mycorrhiza on the plant. So you define the knowledge gap and you explain very briefly what you are going to do. So this is usually the closing statement, the closing paragraph in an introduction, the definition of what is the problem, what are your research questions, and what you are going to do very short to fill. So this is the final statement of the introduction. Okay? So let me go back to the presentation. So in the introduction, of course, you may also include, so having in mind this general structure and these general points, some other things that you may include in the introduction. You may explain what is your study system, the state of the study system, the study organisms, the study site. So you can include this information also in the introduction. But you have to provide here and explain in the introduction why is this these details or these study organisms or sites or system are relevant. It's also important to consider if you are working, I don't know, with a model organisms, or you think that the organism you are working with, can be used as a model, as a representative species for other things, that you explain this in your introduction. Okay. Other tricks and tips, things that you have to think about. Think about the order you present things. Use active voice. You know what is active voice? Do the students know what active voice is? So use the active voice so we perform so active voice, and in general use topical sentences. You may ask, what is a topical sentence? So a topical sentence in a research paper is as follows. So when you have a paragraph, no, I do it. Fine. Don't worry. So a topical sentence in a paper, when you write blogs, suppose this is your introduction, you have paragraphs, different paragraphs that are here represented as blocks. Then you have the material and methods. The results. The discussion, where you will also have a number of paragraphs. So a topical sentence is the first sentence of your paragraph. So the first sentence of your paragraph has to tell the reader what is this paragraph about. So this is important. This helps the reader to know what you're talking about. So don't do, many students do the opposite. They start with something and then at the end they tell what's the paragraph about, Then you make the reader need to read a lot to know what it's about. You want to make life of the reader or the reviewer in this case easy. So you have to go to the point in general, in the writing the introduction, and in each paragraph. Something else, so tips and tricks. One paragraph, one idea. So don't mix many ideas of concepts into different paragraphs. So one paragraph, one idea. And also use short sentences. So keep your sentences short. Even you will have to convey complicated ideas. So don't use intricate sentences, long sentences with a lot of clauses. Just separate it into very short ideas. Very short sentences. I don't know where I put the cap. I know the cap of the. So for the introduction and later on for the discussion, use topical sentences. So in each paragraph, at the beginning, the first sentence, very short, should tell what is your paragraph about. So, okay, this is all good and fine, and you may be thinking, okay, how do I do this? Or is it still very difficult to write? Yeah, that's true. I'm not going to deny that. But what you can do is what I said at the beginning. Start writing. So the best way to deal with it is write. And you can, what I do, and this is, I'm telling you how I usually tackle things, because I also have difficulties in writing. What I do is I outline the intro at first. And what do I mean with outline? Is I prepared a bullet list, some bullet points with the ideas that I'm going to consider. So I write an outline with the number of paragraphs that I think that I need to include. So what is, I think it's relevant to present as a wider statement at the beginning of the introduction. I write a sentence about what is my knowledge gap. I write a sentence, and by doing this, you have already a structure that you can expand. So actually, the bullet list are the topical sentences that you are going to use more or less in outlining your, in developing your introduction. So when this is clear, I think So then we go to the next step, and also, and this is how I start papers. I start my papers. Of course, I know when I start writing a paper in general, because I have thought about it, I have in mind what I've told you before, but actually the real writing, I start writing the paper with the material and methods. That's the first section that I write. And when I was a good student, I'm not anymore. I'm not a student anymore, and I'm not so good sometimes as I wanted. But when I was doing my PhD, often I wrote the material and methods while I was still doing research. I mean, when you are doing research, when you are gathering data, you are doing experiments, you can write already the material of methods for that paper, for when you have the results. And by doing that, you do several things. You gain time. You don't forget any important details. I assume all of you have a lab field notes, or both, or you have a journal where you write your activities. If not, do it. So keep record of everything what you do, but I presume that you all do this. But you can, my point is, you can write the material and methods of a paper before writing the paper itself. But this section is quite easy, because you will explain how you did things. And what you can do in this material and methods is use subheadings to define the different steps that you take to conduct your research. Perhaps you did some lab work, you did some field work, you did, I don't know, some analysis of plant material, of molecular analysis. So you can subdivide this, or you can divide your material and methods into these sections. But still, even though the material and methods are in theory easy to write, you have to be compelling and clear. So you have to demonstrate here that you use and you present details. So allow the reader and the reviewers to see that you use scientifically valid methods. So you have to provide the reader with enough information to recreate your experiment. Also you may use chronological order. So you did the experiment in a certain order, and perhaps you did your experiment in several years. So give information about that. So follow this. And it's also very important that you describe the statistical analysis that you performed. So you told me yesterday that most of you use R or SPSS. If you use R, you have to explain which version of R you used, which packages, which analysis you did. So this is something that is very important to convey. So what should I include in the material and methods, and what type of information? So here, you can see what is expected there. So you did your research somewhere, if you have done fieldwork. So include information about the site, the study organism that its origin, it's a rare strain or populations that you used yourself, or it's something that you bought. If you bought from it's a commercial available product. If it's that, tell what's the company, when did you buy it. So this information is important to be provided. Then give information about the experimental design. So step-by-step procedures, how you prepare the samples, which controls you have, the size of your experiment, so the number of replicates. So you give this information, so it's clear which experiments were done, what the number of controls and what type of controls you have, the number of replicates. And then, as I mentioned, give details about the statistical analysis conducted. Also, and this is something apart, more and more, I think you are probably you have seen this if you have been publishing many journals. If you want to publish in high ranked journals, they will ask you for raw data and for the script. What do I mean with the script? When you use R or S or SAS, these are script-based analysis packages. So you need to have a code, you need to do some coding to conduct the. With SPSS, it's not like that. This is just an interface, but the code is behind this interface. So in many journals, and if you tell me that your idea is to target Q2, Q1 journals, so international peer-reviewed journals, you need to provide quite often these scripts. So you have to keep track of those. Are there questions so far about the introduction, about the material and methods, about something I explained?
Do you have any questions for Professor Eduardo? But I think until now you have delivered your presentation very well, Professor. So you may continue your presentation.
So in the material and methods, you usually use here the past tense or the passive voice. So you see we have changed the introduction in which we usually use an active voice. An active voice is also a way of engaging the reader. So you have to avoid, and it's again easy for me to say it, but try to be clear, concise, to the point, and engage the reader. You want the reviewer, the editor, somebody that is interested in your paper, that is well structured, that wants to read further. And by using the active voice in the introduction, you engage actively the reader. But in the material and methods, you may use the past tense or the passive voice. So actually, in journals, you have this mixed use of voices. But this is secondary important. The important thing is in the material and methods, you have to include the information that I mentioned before in the table. So you have to give the reader, the reviewer, the editor of the journal that is going to evaluate, he has to be able to check that the methods, the methodology you follow is accurate, is fine, and you give all the details that you need to know. Replicates are very important. You need to know the sample size. This is a must. When you give the statistics, you need to give the design of the experiment and how large was this experiment. Did you use 10 replicates? Did you use biological and technical replicates? Give this information. Something important. You may have done an experiment with a pot experiment with plants or with plates or I don't know, or with different isolates. And you may have lost some replicates because things fail, nothing dramatic. If you start rearing 2,000 plants in pots, the chances are high that some of these pots, they die. So also explain this. So what I said yesterday, my advice is don't hide things, because if you hide things, the reviewers will find out and then they will pose you problems. So it's better to say, we started the experiment with 2,000 plants, but out of these 2,000 plants, in the course of the experiment, 25 died because of whatever. So you say it already. So later on, when you give the statistics and the result, you have to give the degrees of freedom. You see that there are 25 replicates missing. So that was for the material and methods. We go for the results. So present your key findings in an objective and clear and objective manner, because these results will be the foundation, the basis of your discussion. And then moving away from the presentation, something that you have to think. I see it also with Belgian students when they do their masters, or when they, and also when you have PhD students. You may have done 15 experiments or 10 experiments or 5 experiments, and you have a lot of results from all these experiments, tackling a problem from different perspectives, using different. You don't need to use everything for the paper. You have to be selective. And this is also an important. Select the material that you want to use. And this brings me to the initial message. You have to think, which message do you want to convey? A paper is one message, one story. So select those results that are interesting, that are useful, that are related with the story that you want to tell. And the other, you leave it aside. So don't try to force all your results or your data into your paper. So sometimes when writing papers, you have to, you know the expression in English, kill your darlings. Yeah? So you have an expression in English, kill your darlings. So perhaps you have done certain experiments and you have some data, and you don't necessarily need to use all the data into a paper. So be selective. It's important to be selective. And at the end, you select 4 or 5 tables and graphs. I don't know, depends on the paper. And that's what you be about. And that's what you will use to write your results. So you select. So you're doing experimental work. You may have done several experiments, experiment 1, experiment 2, experiment 3, and you have different graphs and tables with data. Another graph. Yeah. So you will select from all these experiments, those tables, those data that you want to use, and these are the ones that you are going to discuss in your results. And the rest, you leave it aside. Of course, I'm not saying here to do cherry picking. You know what cherry picking is? I'm using expressions, but you see this also in the literature, no? Cherry picking. Is when you do an experiment and you have data and you only take those data that fit your story. I'm not saying this. I'm not saying that you have to, but what I'm saying is sometimes you have many data, many things, and not necessarily all are useful to tell your story. You may, of course, some of the data that you have could be in the supplementary material, or you can include it. But also, if you include supplementary material, it has to be related to what you want to tell to your story. But my advice is don't think about supplementary material. Think about your main paper, what type of data you want to use, what are the graphs, and how this help to tell the story that you want to convey. And once you have identified your tables and figures, the data, you will separate your results according to your selection. So you will include one paragraph for each graph, for each table. And you then at the beginning, you craft a sentence, you write a sentence that summarizes each result concisely, okay? And then of course, you refer to the figure that you're talking about. So do not present all details at once. So a paragraph with everything, no. So you have 3 tables or three figures. So you will have 3 paragraphs with a summarizing sentence at the beginning, referring to your graph. And it's also perfectly allowed, and this goes to the material and method section, that perhaps, as I mentioned, you have done a research that included lab work and field work and some experiments. So you can use different subheadings to structure these sections as well. Also, something important, and this also to help the reader. So in this paragraph, per graph, you will craft a sentence with the main results referring to the graph or the table, and then translate this data into biological terms. What do I mean with that? So if you have, I don't know, a graph comparing treatments, I don't know, you have a simple bar diagram comparing 2 treatments, treatment A and treatment B, and treatment B is different to A, you can see here. So you have to explain the reader in which directions this different is, and briefly what is the biological meaning of that. But I'm not saying you have to discuss it, you don't have to, but you have to explain the reader what you are comparing and in which direction are going the comparisons. So this also helps the reader to understand your results, because you are very familiar with your own data, but the reader isn't. So you have to help him. You have to hold his hand and guide him through the important parts that you want to mention. So you have to guide him and to show him, okay, this B is different to A, and explain what you were doing this comparison. But without discussing it. So it's a difficult equilibrium. You have to help him, but and here you have to give the statistical details. So in the comparisons, like the one Ito was is deleting, no, it's okay. It's okay. You had a comparison, probably it's a simple t-test or a simple ANOVA. So you have to provide there the values, the p-values, and the degrees of freedom. So you know the degrees of freedom actually, and the f-values. With that, you can know the sample size, the number of replicates. So that's why it's important that if there were some casualties and some experimental replicates were missing, that you explain in the material methods where they were missing. Because when you give the statistics, it will appear your sample size. And if there are some problems, the reviewer who pays attention to this will notice or may notice. So you give this usually in parentheses. So I don't know if you have questions so far about the results, or you want to discuss something. If not, no.
Mrs. Johanna.
Oh, okay, thank you. My name is Johanna. I have a question for Professor Eduardo. Sometimes we have a lot of result, like table, graph, or any kind of that. How can we choose like 4 to 5 data to put in the journal? Thank you.
There is no golden formula. What I do, I usually choose data in a graph form, when it's very apparent, the difference. Because, you know, a graph like what I show you, when you have clear differences, I think it's more easy to interpret than a table. On a table with data, you always have to pay a lot of attention. Perhaps it's because I'm not so good with numbers as such. So for me, I try to put graphically with bar diagrams or with dot diagrams, those things that are quite apparent and that help me to sell the story, to bring the story forward, because that's what the reviewer is going to see. If you see the difference, so I select those data in graphical form. And in tables, I usually tend to select, or I present in tables, perhaps comparisons that do not come forward so clearly. So I'm not hiding anything, I'm presenting those data, but I put on tables this because it will also, how to say, require for the reviewer more time to get it. So, but I think in your question was also how you choose one thing or another. I mean, the criterium, the criteria to select your material is your story, what you want to tell. And you know, your first graph should, or the first table that you present should be the one showing your story, if possible. Of course, sometimes if you have elaborated research combining things, you may need to present it stepwise, and at the end you get the picture. But just select the material and present the material that helps you to tell your story.
To Mrs. Joanna, any feedbacks from you? Okay. Any other questions from students or from professors and doctors? Okay, Professor Eduardo, you may continue your presentation.
Sure. So now we end up in the probably what is the most difficult part of writing a paper, which is the discussion, because it requires a lot of consideration. And in this discussion, you will interpret and discuss your results and the meaning of these results. So the discussion actually should be a self-contained story. I mean, you could ideally be able to read the story, the discussion almost as a standard alone. So usually what I do and what is often done is you start the discussion with a brief reminder of what is your knowledge gap, what are you doing, what is the gap that you are trying to fill in. So you know, if the reviewer, the editor, the reader, is tired, has been going through the that is quite dry. So he comes to he or she comes to the discussion, and at the beginning you remind him, you explain him, I mean, what is your paper about, what you want to answer, and what we didn't know. And then you will, yeah, by doing this, he will know or she will know where you are. And then you have to explain what is the meaning of the results, and what should you or what. Hello? So what else do you, or how do you tackle, what do you include in the discussion? So you have results, but you have to think about the multiple interpretations of your results. And then you have to explain, to lay out the potential explanations and why you think that your explanation is the right one and is the justified one. So it might be that a certain result or a certain by other authors is interpreted in a different way. So you have to mention that. And then you have to explain why you agree, why you don't agree, or it's something new that was not considered, that is complementing a certain topic. So you have to keep your discussion, in this sense, tight and concrete, and referring to all the results that support each given interpretation. So you may want to lay out and to define competing explanations. So that's totally fine. And you have to relate your work to what other authors have done. So you have to ask yourself when writing the discussion a number of questions. How do my results compare to those of similar studies? Are in the same line? Are going in a different way? And then you have to explain if they are in the same line, why and how. If they are going in a different way, again, and what you think of it. So it's very important to see whether your results are consistent or inconsistent with previous research, or is presenting something completely new. And if so, explaining why you think this is something that is new, but perhaps in other related field areas have been observations. So you have to provide this information. So these are the questions that I advise you to think when writing the discussion. If there are inconsistencies, if your results are different to what has been done in the past, then you can explain this by asking yourself a number of questions. Perhaps these inconsistencies or this difference could be attributed to the fact that you are working with a different organism, or in a different geographical context, or in a different period of time. Or perhaps the other authors use other methodologies. So you are using a different methodology. So you should explain these things. So that means that you have to go to the papers, the other papers, read them, and compare what you did with what they did, and look for the difference. And on those differences, you may have an explanation in the inconsistent or in the different ways your results are going. So this asking these questions helps you. I hope they help you to write the discussion. So it's not writing the discussion, you write discussion and then no. So you start by reminding the editor, the writer, the reader, the reviewer what you wanted to do, what type of research gap you wanted to fill. Then you explain briefly what you did, what results you obtained, and how these results fill that gap. Okay? And then by asking these questions and comparing your work with others and looking at all these things, you can explain difference or uh, or give credit to your own findings. It's also, again, don't hide things. You may know that your study has certain caveats or certain problems or things that were not. You can acknowledge those things. So it's good that you already say, well, we did this because we decided to, we took a number of assumptions, but we are aware that something else could have been done. So it's good that you present this in the discussion. This is also a way of expanding and developing your discussion. In some papers or in some journals, you have a section itself with a conclusion. In some others, you have the discussion, and the final paragraph of the discussion is your conclusion. So whether it's a section apart or it's a discussion, your conclusion will come anyway at the very end of the paper. And here you don't restate, you don't tell again what are your results. You will try to convey why your results are important in a broader sense. And how your contribution gives new insights or open new possibilities to a research problem, to a gap that you have filled in. So it's not just restating your results or your main findings. You have to go a bit further. So I think we have covered all the different sections. Of course, you have a literature, so it's important that include all the relevant reference and that this reference list is in the right format and all these things. But these are more format things. But we have covered what can you do, what type of questions do you have to ask yourself about when preparing a draft. Then some general advices. Story, again, a paper is a message, it's a story, it's a short story. You doesn't need to, the story or your message doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to, so think about what you want to tell. And we don't have to send every time a rocket to the moon to tell a story. You can tell something simple, but can be useful. The message has to flow. So you need to get to the point, keep it short, help the reader. So use what I said, use at the beginning of each paragraph, a sentence that tells you what is the paragraph about. In the results section, guide the author, the reader, through your results. And then I said this for the selection of results, less is more. Sometimes it's better to keep it short, to present less results, to keep it short than put in a lot of things or everything you have. Because at the end, it's like a mass of things that is difficult to digest. So you want something that is clear. So sometimes it's better to leave things apart. And every time you have, while writing, while preparing, remind yourself of what is the story you want to tell. And once you have uh, your draft, read it completely, and then edit it. So, and then read it again, and edit it again, and so on, and so on, and do this an iterative process. Sometimes it's good you leave a paper, you leave a draft for a couple of days or 1 week aside. You get a clear mind, and then you read it again and you edit. You will find out problems, and it's okay. I mean, nobody writes a perfect paper from the first time. Nobody, not even the best. Uh, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And if you use this iterative way, you will improve your paper. And once you think, okay, it's done for me, give it to somebody, a colleague, somebody who perhaps speaks better English than you, a colleague, a professor, and ask for a second opinion. Ask whether the story is clear. And then and you will get feedback, and again, that means you will have to edit to read it again. But that's part of the game. So, and what do you have to keep in mind when editing the paper? Perhaps in your story, there is something that doesn't come clearly across. Perhaps there is something that wasn't explained clearly. Or sometimes a paragraph, you read it out loud. Sometimes it's good to read things out loud. This is complicated. This is not flowing. This is, so edit it, make it easier. So you have to make the reader, his life or her life, easy and able to follow you. And if you do that, if you have catch the attention and then the paper reads well, yeah, you have more chances of getting this liked, accepted. That start somebody, I don't understand this, why this graph, this is not related to the topic. So you want, yeah, people to walk through your paper smoothly. I give you here some reference. I will send the presentation to Rina, where you have also some guidelines of how to write papers. There are many, so I just took from here and there some parts. And once you have a draft, although from the very beginning you should have in mind, you have to select a journal. So I don't have, I cannot give you tips. Depends of your topic, depends of your. But what I can emphasize is read the scopes of the journal. Read the scopes of the journal and see whether your draft fits the journal scopes. And if when you go to a journal and you see the scope, what is the doesn't fit completely, I would say look for another journal. Don't waste your time and energy in trying to fit your research in something that perhaps is not the scope or it doesn't fit or of course you can write in a way that it fits. So that's why you have to think about that when you start writing. What is your audience? To which type of journals you want to send it? This has to be at the beginning. Because if you do it post-hoc, if you do it at the end, it will always be forcing your draft. So I think we have 10 minutes left. These are the type of tips or steps and questions that you can pose yourself to write a draft. I don't know if you want to discuss anything, if you want to ask me about I didn't get into the reviewing process and things like that, but
Thank you so much, Professor Eduardo, for your excellent presentation. And you have enlightened us so many things about scientific writing. Again, you have delivered your presentation very well. And I do believe all of us, including students, can easily understand and digest what you were trying to convey and explain. So any question from doctors, professor, and also from students to Professor Eduardo? Uh, to Dr. Mangku.
Thank you. Actually, I'm work on social science, but I will try to understand the flow. I think almost same. We have problem about graph. We explain the graph after, or we explain the data and then we give the picture or graph or tables or something like that. This is typically all of our problem. Sometimes it's quite difficult. We explain the data and then we give the pictures, or we give the pictures and then explain the data. This is our first. And then for the second, this is also typically our fault that
vanilla. Aduk,
which
masukkan tepung, masuk. Nah, jika sudah
common problem. What about your opinion about this problem? Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for your questions. Regarding your first, I think you were asking if you have graphical material like pictures about the study site or about the material you're working, where do you place it? I think you will put it at the beginning. So usually either you will refer to the type of work or field sites or at the beginning of your material and methods. And I think it's good to include that, especially if our species or areas or constructions. I mean, you come from social science. I don't know what type of material you could include, but I think it's very good to provide this information so you give the reader a picture about what you're talking about. And you know, the scientific world is a bit unfair because it's biased. So biased in which sense? Most of the journals are in what I would call Western, coming from Western countries. So many reviewers are from either Europe or North America, and many of them may not be familiar with your study systems, with your species, with your, so they don't have a picture of what they're talking. If I work in Europe and I refer to something European, a colleague from France, from Germany will know what I'm talking about because he's familiar. But if it's something coming from here, I think it's very important to provide graphical aid. And that will help the reader to know, okay, so if I'm talking about a village in Indonesia or a social communities in the countryside, you can provide where is this located, how a village looks like. That will help the reader to get. And I will put this at the very beginning. Then your second question was related to journal selection. I mean, that journal selection and what to do and the problem of trying to fit once you have the data, once you have written into a journal. I mean, that's something that we all do. I mean, I'm saying here that you have to think about that from the beginning. And I think that's a very good piece of advice. And if possible, this should be done. So from the very beginning, when starting to do research, you need to think what is your audience, what type of journals, perhaps not the specific journal, but what type of journals, in which area you want to get this into it. But if it's not the case, if you do this a posteriori, I think you have to be realistic. So you have to think about what are the main strengths of your story, and then select a journal that fits. Perhaps it's not the best journal with the highest impact factor, but then my solution, my approach will be pragmatic and try to get it into a journal where it fits, instead of trying to force it. You know, it's like a car. You may have, if you have a Formula, a Formula One, a racing car from the beginning, you can compete. If you have a very bad car, you can try to put things in the car, like wheels, flashy wheels, a wind thing. It is still, if it's a bad car, it will. So don't force things. Perhaps you just have to go to the right journal. And perhaps it's not the best with the highest impact factor, but if it fits the scope, that's better than trying to force things up.
Dr. Mangku, do you have any feedbacks to Professor? Okay, perfect. Any other questions? Maybe from online participants? Are there any questions? And maybe I could give opportunities to students. Or maybe Mrs. Rina, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I don't want to raise questions because I do have a lot actually, Professor, but let's keep it when we review my journal. I just, in this opportunity, I would like to express gratitude. I'm very fortunate. If I may tell the history of our workshop today, it's actually started when my colleague and I, Prof and I, decided to conduct short course for scientific writing journals in Ghent University previously. But then things happened, pandemics hit, so we couldn't make it to go there. And then with the kindness of Professor Eduardo, he decided instead of us going there, he will go here to Brawijaya University. And I am very glad that today, instead of just teaching Pak Rofik and I, Professor Eduardo actually shared his previous knowledge to all of us. So it's a really precious moment for me personally. And your explanation, Professor, you're saying something like holding the hands of the reader. Today, I think you hold our hands together to know step by step the things of writing the journal, and it's very clear for us to receive your explanations, and for that I cannot thank you enough. So yeah, on behalf of everybody here, I would like to express our gratitude for your kindness and your clear explanations, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Rina. Actually, it's my pleasure, and again, yeah, I thank you all for your attention and for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity. I know it's very, like yesterday, a couple of hours, and today is not enough, but yeah, I think it's a start. I think I hope that I give you at least a couple of clear ideas that you can use, and writing is trying and to try. Don't give up. But hopefully, with some of these tips, at the beginning is a bit easier. And I have extended material about scientific writing. I will share it with Rina, and I don't know. Perhaps it's something that. Because I see it was for me very, very clear yesterday that there is a need, not only from one department, but at university level, to think about how to raise this. So perhaps it's something that we need to discuss, and perhaps organize a summer course so we have more time that we can do it, because that was now a bit not improvised, but this was just yeah, short term it came out instead of Rina coming to Ghent, although she's finally coming to Ghent. But perhaps we can do it more structurally, and not only me, and perhaps with one colleague or another colleague to give. And we have more time to provide examples and it's just wanted to finalize scientific publishing and preparing papers is not only about writing. There are some other aspects that we need to, I think, need to be considered and discussed. So it's important to, if we would have more time, to consider it and to bring that to you. I'm thinking about the statistical analysis or how to present. This is also very important. So with that, I can only, thank you all and thank Brawijaya University for inviting me. It's been a wonderful experience, scientifically, educationally, and most important, personally. So thank you all for your hospitality.
Ladies and gentlemen, so before I close this workshop, allow me to take some highlight points from this today's workshop. The first one is paper is a message. Second one, the title should be catchy and conceptual. The third one is it is important to clearly state how our work contribute to filling the knowledge gap. And the fourth one is don't hide things in material and methods. The sixth one is when writing the results, be selective. Select data that are related to the story you want to tell, you want to convey, but don't force all your data into your paper. Kill your darlings. And also, lastly, in conclusion, don't restarting your findings, but summarize the outcome of your study. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have finally come to the end part of today's scientific workshop. Before I close this workshop, I would like to invite Vice Dean of Financial Affairs, Dr. Mangku Purnomo, to give us some short closing remarks.
I just thinking to take photo. I'm sorry, Professor Eduardo. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Eduardo, for your coming. And also Purina, Pak Lukman, and Vito. Ito, I think Vito Corleone. Vito, thank you. Thank you. And I'm very pleasure for that. We amazing because when we're talking about publication today, we should come on, go. This is all of our students. We should publish more or less on the not on the high ranking, but on the middle and on the lower, all of our students. So, and this moment is very good, and we also can doing like the maybe a daring seminar or workshop with Professor Eduardo. Okay, we will come there, and then also online with Mr. Eduardo, particularly the agro technology department, because I will see the participant is quite much. We have online and offline, so I'm sorry, Professor Eduardo, for short time you do many things here. Please Renz come here back, and we Renz more much time for doing work and also pleasure maybe. Okay, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Applause for all of us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mangku, for the closing remarks. And let's once again give a big applause to Professor Eduardo. Professor, we would like to express our gratitude for your for you, because you are providing your valuable time to come to our Faculty of Agriculture and sharing your knowledge and experience through the guest lecture program we just held yesterday and through this today's scientific writing workshop. And we do hope that you are enjoying your time, first time here in Indonesia. And that's all. So maybe we can have a photo session right now. Terima kasih kepada Bapak Ibu dosen yang telah bergabung dengan kami secara daring. Dr. Bayu, kemudian juga Dr. Ibu Siska, kemudian juga Profesor Aminuddin dan Bapak Ibu sekalian. Terima kasih dan sampai jumpa. Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman semua yang mengikuti secara luring, silakan mengisi presensi hari ini karena untuk sertifikat akan dibagikan melalui tautan ini. Terima kasih.